Hello, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us on the episode of Enneagram and Marriage Pod today. We are talking with my friend, expert Mara Eller, writing teacher, who is such a gift to us as she helps us to unearth beauty in our stories and relationships today. I am so grateful to have this episode positioned also 1 week after last Monday's episode talked about how we can make sure to get our narrative out so that we don't tell a story that's too large, the big aerial view, and forget to do the inner work to actually heal the details of our story. The cool thing about today's episode is that not only will Mara give us tips specifically for our relationships, but also remind us that when we do the little nitty gritty work of remembering details vividly about our story, the pain points, the joys in writing, we can then allow ourselves to see the bigger picture messaging, the hero's moment, and also the healthy direction that we're going and want to continue going. I think that one of my favorite things about Mara today is that she has the pacing we need instead of running ahead. She is in a 4.5 space, if you will, on the Enneagram, that dark night of the soul, but also just that place of digging deep. And Mara has really unearthed so much beauty for her and her students that as she dives deep with them and with us today, we get this opportunity to shine brighter because she's finding what was beautiful and lost in our lives. So I'm just grateful. I've already started picking my journals back up this past weekend, and I hope that you'll continue, even perhaps as one of her students, because she does this with students as well. So today you're joining us to already be learning how you can write out your story and find the beautiful pieces that you might be missing. And of course, it's also going to be fun to learn about Mara as an Enneagram 4 and her 4-7 pairing. Hear some of her and her husband's examples of stories that they're now learning to retell. And I'm just so grateful. We also recognize that this is a season where Rings of Power is on. For those of you who know the Tolkien lore that we love to talk about here, I'm just happy that Mara also even uses Frodo as an example. Some of you know I got to meet Elijah Wood, who plays Frodo, a few weeks back. And I'm still thinking about that and just allowing myself to say, wow, being with somebody who knows how to see a big epic story like Mara, and then also getting to share in just the fun with my family to say, hey, thank you to this person who represented it so well while we're watching the Rings of Power. It's just a joy because it's really important to find good stories that lend themselves to seeing the depths of humanity, as well as take us on individual tales of everybody has a different story arc. And so in that tale, we get to hear different story arcs. And now that Amazon's on season 2 of Rings of Power, it's getting really good. And we're getting to see a backstory of how the rings were crafted. And so I'm just in story mode totally right now, very inspired for next season. Can't wait to tell you about that. But of course, in our presence, we're right here, right now, even as we look to fun things going on the side. We're digging deep here so that we can continue to have a fun track and journey out there versus just arduous, just hard, just broken, just looking for self-soothing, but not actually doing our work. So do your work with me today. I promise you it will be worth it. I'm so proud of you for pressing play. And let's talk to Mara today about unearthing beauty in your life. Hello, Mara. We're so happy to have you on the Enneagram and Marriage podcast today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Well, I am so grateful. You have a lovely personality, and more importantly, to this episode, you are sharing that beautiful personality and gifting us with your writing help. So I'm so thankful. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your family and your work.
Yeah, so I'm Mara. I'm a four wing five, pretty sure I'm self-preservation. I'm
Mhm.
married to a seven, and we have three little girls, ages 9, 7, and 4. Always trying to guess, like what numbers we see surfacing in them. We might have a one, maybe another four or a two, and the youngest one, I don't know. She's a Spitfire, so we'll see.
Yes.
Right, currently, she is a tiger because
Mhm.
we just got a tiger costume, and that is very, very exciting.
Oh, and very fitting, it sounds like.
Yes, she is fierce in all the ways. So yeah, I'm a writer, teacher, editor, coach, and I'm just really passionate about using words to connect us more deeply with ourselves, with God, and with each other.
Mm, wow. Well, that's beautiful. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about, for those who are also fellow lovers of words, if you've always had that desire to share with writing or how that's shown up for you in your life.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I've always loved reading and writing since I learned how to do it, and um, wrote stories and stuff like that since I was little. But I didn't really know, how to use that in any kind of professional way. So I graduated from Vassar College in 2004 with a degree in Latin American Studies because my college didn't have a creative writing major.
Mm.
And I basically had no idea what I wanted to do. I just knew I didn't want to move to New York City, like most of my classmates, to live in a closet and work in a cubicle.
Yes.
So I worked at one point, it was like two different restaurants and a bookstore. And then in the fall after I graduated, I went to Spain for 4 months, basically to escape the real world, which is I had a amazing experience on the Camino de Santiago, which is something I've written about recently on my Substack. But basically that's the thing, when you escape the real world, it's still there when you come back finally.
Yes.
And it was like, okay, I've always loved writing, but I don't know how to make any money doing it. I had ruled out journalism because I don't have that knack for like figuring out what people want to hear and like hunting down stories. And I was like, no, I just want to write about what I want to write about.
Yeah.
So I ended up going back to graduate school in Tallahassee, which is where I live now, Tallahassee, Florida, at FSU. And I got a master's in American Studies, focusing on religion and literature.
Mm.
And while I was there, I also got a graduate certificate in editing and publishing and started to get some confirmation that I was really good at editing. And so after that, I started teaching writing, literature, and history at like a small private school. Years later, doing a little bit of freelance editing. Then years later, became a guidance counselor, helping students apply to college. And I fell in love with the part of that that is helping them write their personal statements, which, like, I think you have a child around that age, so you probably know, but it's like, just put your soul on paper in 650 words and don't worry, your whole future is writing on this, no pressure.
Right?
And the process of helping them figure out, like, what in the world do I say leads to who in the world am I and
Mm.
who do I want to be, and led them through this really transformative experience when they were willing to engage in it.
Mm.
And after I had done that for a little while, I started focusing just on that, primarily on that part of it. And I thought, man, adults should get to do this too. This is amazing. And
Mhm.
so then out of that, I developed my own writing program for adults called Unearthing Beauty. And I call it like a blend of soul work and writing work,
Mhm.
where I walk students through a process to unpack what they believe, like the stories that they're believing about themselves,
Mhm.
and who they are, that then color everything else that they believe. And then we choose one of those, like one formative event, to explore more deeply and turn into a polished personal narrative. So they get more than 650 words, but we're still trying to keep it pretty short. And I teach like a lot about the craft of writing and story structure. So I get to use like my English teacher, writing teacher expertise, and then also bring in a lot of inner work so
Mm.
that they're naming the stories that they've been believing about who they are and learning to see themselves in a more compassionate and accurate way. And that's just like my favorite thing that I get to do, that I've done 4 cohorts now. And I think that really opened the door to teaching online, which of course, before COVID, it was like, Zoom, like what was that? And who would do that? And and
Ah.
yeah. And so just through that, and then I got some connections with other writers and just expanded my network and started getting back into my own writing. And now I've cut way back on my day job as a teacher and guidance counselor, still do that a little bit. But I'm able to focus more now on my own business as a freelance editor, and then the 2 online writing programs that I offer. The other one is for prescriptive nonfiction, called The Soul and Science of Great Writing.
Hmm.
So that's
Oh, cool. So if any of
maybe a
our
longer story than you might have wanted.
No, I love that. And for any of our listeners who really want to pursue writing as a deeper passion, it sounds like you're a wonderful person they can connect with. Is that right? And I know
Well,
you're not trying to toot your own
yes.
horn, but you really have a lot of deeper dives here.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the last 5 or so years, um, I've been really trying to lean into, like, who am I and what am I created to do in
Yeah.
this life? Like, what am I uniquely gifted to do? And I believe that every one of us is uniquely made,
Mm.
uniquely gifted to bring something that no one else can bring in quite that exact way,
Mm.
to the world, to make it a little bit better in some small but ultimately monumental way. And it is just, I think, one of the greatest feelings available to us on this earth, to feel like we are using our gifts in a way that is unique to us. Enneagram 4 speak coming
Yes,
out here, of course,
yes,
but
yes.
and that can really make a difference. And so I just, the first time I offered the Unearthing Beauty class, it was kind of like, I'm going to try to help grown-ups write their personal statements, and maybe it'll have this amazing spiritual, emotional component, but who knows? And
Mm.
it did. And it was just like
Wow.
chills, when people would say, "Oh my gosh, I'm seeing my whole life differently." It's like, I certainly cannot take all the credit for that, but there's something about the course, the program, the process that invites people into that transformative process, which is
Mm.
just amazing to be a part of.
Wow. So whether you're an author who's really trying to get a book lift off or a person who just wants a deeper dive, we want to hear about this. And so tell us more about unearthing beauty as you process this with your people, because as you may know, we had a guest on last week, Adam Young. He encouraged us to really dig into our stories. And it sounds like you said, not just with the younger kids, but with everybody, you're not only doing this, but finding beautiful results. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. Well, why don't I'd love to maybe share a little bit more about the soul work part of it. So I kind of think of it as a blend of writing work and soul work. And I guess I'll say briefly, the
Yeah.
writing work covers kind of probably the things you might imagine of, like, storycraft, and what is a narrative arc, and how can I, use that to make my story engaging and help me figure out what to keep in and what to leave out. And,
Mhm.
um, um, and then all the way down to like imagery, and we don't get too much into like punctuation and stuff like that, but I do give some edits, and I actually am reading like every word that my students write and giving them feedback every single week. So it's like a very, very supported journey,
Wow,
um,
that's amazing.
that way. And I have had students who are, aspiring authors who are hoping to get published, or who are, working towards a memoir, or
That's what I was wondering. Okay,
yeah.
interesting.
So it's the style of writing is memoir, but it's the technical term for this short, like mini memoir, is a personal essay. So I
Mm,
like to call it personal narrative, because essay can give people like high school flashbacks
mhm,
that maybe are misleading. But it's like a little story. Well, we shouldn't say little, but short, relatively short story that covers a transformation. It's focused on a certain aspect of your life and who you are and how you changed.
mm,
So that's kind of the writing side. But the soul work side, and of course, it's all blended together, and the writing work supports the soul work and vice versa. But the premise underlying that is that our reality is formed by the stories we believe. In other words, like, we create our own worlds through our interpretations of what happened to us, or what happens, what happened in the past and what is continually happening. So you can kind of think of it like we're all swimming in our own stories, but we're unaware of it. So I don't know if you've heard that, like, I don't know if it's a reference to a quote, but it's something like, the fish is like, "Where's the ocean? I hear there's this amazing thing called the ocean. Like, have you
mm.
seen it? Have you seen it?" And it's finally like, you're in it, but you
Wow.
don't know it, because that, like, you've never been able to get outside of it and look down on it and see that there's other options.
Mm,
So a huge part of what we do is I try to help my students just learn to see their stories. And
mm,
that's where all the change begins. Like, sometimes all you need is just seeing it.
yeah. Mhm.
So
Just
so
even like you
these
said, we don't see it, but you get it out. You get it out of their soul. Wow.
Yeah, so like we do a lot of brainstorming exercises, and sort of ease into the deeper work. And of course, students can go as deep as they want to go, but
Mhm.
I'm always really impressed with my students, and where they end up going, what they end up unearthing, which is, of course, ends up being beautiful. But there's often some hard parts in there as well, because
Oh
these
my,
stories that okay, yeah, these stories that we believe about ourselves can be good stories or negative stories, like true or untrue, and or of course, usually a mixture of both. Like,
mhm,
the truth in the stories is going to be grounded in who we know we are, like in who God tells us we are, if you're a person of faith, who we're called to be. But a
mhm,
lot of times our stories can be out of alignment with that, and we don't even realize it,
mm,
because they're based on things that happened to us as children, and depending on our age, that was quite a while ago.
mhm.
um, and so our stories can end up getting pretty twisted. And so once we can recognize them, then we can start to say, oh, but like, it's amazing how you just put it into words and you're saying like, oh, well, that's obviously a lie. But I've
Yeah.
been believing that my whole life.
Isn't that so interesting that when you get it out on
Yeah.
paper or in, in some sort of verbal form, you're shocked at what you say. Yeah, we talked a little bit about how I was coming from a session before you and I talked today, and that was one of the most powerful elements of the session was the narrative. So I love that you are reminding people that bearing witness is important, as we talked about last week with Adam, and you're saying, I bear witness to these stories. Have you ever noticed that about yourself, that that's so important to what you're doing there?
A little bit. Yeah, and it's not just me either because I keep it really small, so it's an intimate group. And
Mm.
as the weeks go on, then they start to share more of their stories with each other. And no one's ever forced to share, but usually by the last few weeks, they're wanting to trade stories with each other. And they, I mean, that's been a really powerful experience that they've said, oh, it's that whole, oh, I'm not alone. Like other people have felt this too, or someone else validated that, yeah, they would be really angry if this happened to them.
Mm. Mhm. That's
So,
so powerful.
yeah. So, once we can start to identify our stories, then we can start to think about how we might be able to reframe them. And that's when we really grow and transform. And the writing, story craft process is really, really helpful for that.
Mhm.
But I do have I don't know, I have a personal example I can share about what I mean if this is still kind of abstract for
Yes,
anyone listening.
I was gonna ask some deeper dive questions, and I love that because I think some of our listeners might already want to take some of these prompts and run with them, and
Yeah.
others of our listeners are hopefully saying too, "Maybe I can make some time for this class." But tell us more about that. I would love to hear that example.
Yeah. So just one more little piece of background is that our stories always start with facts. There's the experiences that happen to us,
Mhm.
but a set of facts is not a story. The story comes when we create meaning based on those facts. And our brains are doing that all the time, whether we realize it or not. The opportunity is that we can start to do that intentionally.
Mhm.
But I'll share an example from my own life of when I, was not doing it intentionally. So something that happened to me a few times, more than once over the course of childhood, is that friends would abandon me without explanation. So this is
Mm.
just like a fact. Like we were friends and now
Yeah.
we are not. And I don't know why. And it feels awful. Right.
Yeah.
But then the story became, well, I'm the kind of person who makes people want to leave.
Mm.
Or in my story, people randomly decide they don't like me anymore and abandon me.
Oh.
So then, because that's the story I'm living, I'm looking for signs to confirm that story. Like
Mm.
it's like that confirmation bias. So I'm constantly needing validation that it's not happening. And anything I see that seems like it might be a sign of that, I'm like looking out, like sensitive to that, sensitive to criticism. And I internalize any negative
Mm.
emotions I sense in the people I love.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in ways that I still don't fully understand, but I know from the Enneagram, then
Mhm.
I end up pushing them away unintentionally and making it a self fulfilling prophecy and
Yeah.
all of that mess.
Mm.
And so that's been something that's been huge for my friendships. But then it can also come up in marriage, of
Mhm.
hyper vigilant to discern his mood. And, I'm not, luckily at this point, I'm not afraid that he's going to leave
Yeah.
at all.
That is good.
But there still can be subtle ways that these types of stories are influencing,
Mhm.
the way that I'm interpreting facts.
Mhm. Yeah. That's fascinating. So you're saying, personally speaking, I think I've gained a lot and don't do that as much anymore, but you've had to do this work of learning to reframe.
Yeah. So then the reframe, once you articulate it like, oh, okay, like I use this phrase, like, I'm the kind of person who, or you can say, like, in my story, this type of thing happens, that can help us to
Mm.
recognize that pattern of meaning that we've created.
Mm.
So like there's something defective about me that just makes people want to leave for no reason. And it's like, okay, well, like that's one interpretation.
Yeah. Mm.
Or maybe, and it's the work is better done with a specific example. So if I were like coaching myself through this, I'd be like, well, let's pick one time when a friend left
Mm.
and try to look at what else might have been going on. Maybe that person, maybe it wasn't about you at all. Like maybe
Mhm.
there
Mhm.
was something going on in their life, or maybe relationships are just hard in this, fallen world. And this is, like friendships go through seasons and cycles, and
Mm.
it's always sad when they come to an end. But
Mhm.
So it's like you just start looking for like, well, what are the other possible interpretations here
Mhm.
that might be more compassionate, that might be based more on the truth that I know now as a 42-year-old woman that I didn't know as an 8-year-old or a 15-year-old.
Mm. I like that. That's a great example. And are you finding people finding some release when they give themselves the time to go into the story on a richer level?
Definitely. Um,
Okay.
hard to think of any way to share like anyone else's
Yeah.
insights, of course, but yeah, definitely. Where again, just saying, oh, like this is how I interpreted that thing,
Mm, mhm,
and then seeing like how is that, what is the fruit of that interpretation? Like, do I like that story?
mm,
What has that led me? How's that led me to behave? And maybe, would I rather live in a different story?
mm,
Because like the foundational principle of the Unearthing Beauty program is you can rewrite your story, which can sound weird because it's like, well, I can't change what happened to me. And that's absolutely true. But you can change your interpretation
mhm,
of what happened to you and what that is going to mean for you moving forward.
mhm,
So I guess one of the powerful shifts that we emphasize is that like when you are writing your memoir type narrative,
mhm,
you are the hero or the heroine of your story.
mm,
And then for people of faith, this doesn't mean that we're pushing God out of the picture.
mhm,
Rather, it's you're rewriting your story with God. Like God is the author of creation, and in His image, we're given the ability to co-author our lives with Him.
mhm,
And so then, and so like sometimes Christians can like bristle at the idea of like I'm not the hero.
mhm.
That that can't be right. But you are. Like if you think about like the Lord of the Rings, like each one of us is the hero of our own stories,
Yeah.
and God might be like Gandalf or something. Like He's the guide that comes in to
Mhm,
help us, but like Frodo is still the hero, or whatever it is. So the hero is the character who wants something that she can't seem to get,
mhm,
and goes through a trial of some sort
mm,
to learn something, to then transform and be sort of reborn as a new, hopefully better version of herself.
mm. I
And
love
each one of
that.
us is doing that over and over. It's just a question of us seeing it, which the writing process helps us to do.
That was well said. That's really invitational. And I can feel the pacing that you're bringing me to intentionally sit with things. And I do think we need that slower pacing to really get from the aerial big view down to these details. And do you find that when people take the time to sit with their five senses, remember things, write out the details, really get nitty gritty on this hero's journey, that things start to get more clarity?
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Like I remember one person said that she was actually writing about something a little bit similar to what I mentioned about friend conflict in like middle school or high school. And she said that by the end of the process, she was able to forgive everyone involved and recognize the part that she played and also forgive herself
Wow.
and like find sort of complete, fairly complete closure on that event that had been sort of haunting her for 30 years.
Wow. That's beautiful. And that is what you're doing. You're unearthing beauty.
Yeah.
And it's so cool. And do you also, for those who are one-to-ones out there, do you feel like, or self-pres, that it's a good stretch for them to do group work, or do you also do some one-to-one helping?
Like in my business more broadly.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, so I think, I'm definitely an introvert and a self-preservation type. So it's certainly a stretch for me when I'm in
Yeah.
the teacher role.
Yeah.
But I keep the Unearthing Beauty class very small, so it doesn't
Mm.
feel like a big group. Obviously it's still a group. And I think I do a pretty good job at not making people feel like they have to share, but yeah, giving little nudges of like, because there's something about vulnerability that's so powerful. And if you're familiar with the work of Brene Brown, then you already know about this some, but um, we actually talk about that at the beginning of the class, that the the human quest, as I see it, is for intimacy
Mhm.
with God, with others, with ourselves, and that comes only through courageous vulnerability. So
Mm.
I try to create a safe place and then give little nudges to help people share, like just barely outside of their comfort zone. Again, never forcing anything, but then it just builds. Like they hear someone else share something and they think, oh wow, that was brave, and what a wonderful response they had. Maybe I could do that.
Wow, that is really neat. And sounds like they're learning, as you said, with Brené's work, just, that when we share intimately, it makes us feel safer, as a person to have somebody else do it. So I love that. You're also being vulnerable in there as you make it a safe place that's not rushed.
Yeah,
And you also say we're each living in our own stories, and you've talked some about that. How can we start to see those stories more clearly, even in and outside of your class, would you say?
yeah. Well, so I mean, I also have been thinking a lot about our stories and how that affects our marriages because
Mhm.
we have done a little bit of coaching with marriage, and um, that's obviously like pretty high up there on the list of intimate relationships, right? That we are, and I'm
Mhm.
always passionate about like how do we cultivate true intimacy.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, it just starts really with asking questions, and you could just do that in your head, or you could do that in a journal. You could do it out loud with someone that feels safe to you, like, especially if you're an external processor. Or do you talk about Myers-Briggs on this podcast sometimes?
Yeah, a little
A
bit.
little bit. Well, I'll just mention any INFJs out there. If you have an extroverted feeling function, this is like a life hack that has been pretty important for me, is to learn that I'm like very into feelings, but I have to process my own feelings externally. And
Mm,
that's best done with another person.
yeah.
So like I think we can start by just asking ourselves, like, I think again, it's best to start it with a specific situation rather than what are the stories of my entire life? Although the Enneagram does provide a really good tool for that, which I can come back to. But it's just saying, like, what is the story I'm telling myself about this situation? And
Mhm.
so maybe if it's okay, let's use the example of like a disagreement or tense situation for a couple.
Mhm.
So, let's say like you're starting to feel some conflict arising, or
Mhm.
you're frustrated.
Mhm.
Um, so you can stop and say, okay, what is the story I'm telling myself about this situation? And it takes some practice, but try to figure out what that is. And I don't mean like a deep childhood wound feeling, but like
Mhm.
I can give you a little example here. Like, I think this is when we talked about once in a session. So, like, we found out that, like, for my husband, again, he's a 7, I'm a 4,
Mhm.
but he is actually an introvert, and he is a school principal, and so it's a very, very social, extroverted job. And
Mhm.
he comes, very emotionally demanding, especially for a 7.
Mhm.
And so he comes home at the end of the day, and in my from my perspective, he is like, leave me alone. I'm tired of dealing with everyone's problems, which he said before. And of course, you know, he loves it and he's great at it, but we all get to those points. So just if anyone ever listens, who is one of those people at work,
Yeah.
he does love you and wants to help. But
Yeah.
um, you know,
Yeah.
so I'm like, he wants to be left alone. Clearly, I'm reading into every little thing to say, like, oh, he's annoyed. He wants us to leave him alone. And also I'm thinking, yeah, but I've been here with the kids for however many hours and they've been driving me crazy. And now it's your turn to help. And you don't want to help me. And so that's kind of my story.
Mhm.
But his story is very different. His story is I've been giving attention to everyone else all day.
Mhm.
I want to be welcomed home with joy and
Mhm.
affection and some positive attention because I haven't gotten any all day,
Mm.
so that I, know that you love me and I want you to be glad when I get home. And so, but what actually happens is everyone just ignores me, which means that nobody loves me.
Mhm.
And I'm kind of thinking, well, I'll just give him space because that's what he wants. And also I'm a little bit salty about it. So
Yeah.
it's like this complete, like we're missing each other.
Mhm.
But then once we understand, like, oh, my story is this and your story is that, then it's like, well, how can we start to live in the same story
Mm.
and find some middle ground? And
Mm.
it, of course, completely diffuses frustration
Mhm.
once you can understand the other person's story. But if we don't know what those stories are, then, we can get trapped in that, like, well, these are the facts. And we
Mm.
all assume that our interpretation of those facts is the right interpretation and is probably the only interpretation because that's just human nature. And so then we can be like, well, no, you did this. And it's like you start to argue about these little facts,
Mhm.
thinking that, the information is the key when really it's the story that will lead to connection that will help us to like really understand what's happening.
Mm. Yeah. That makes such a good marriage when you're both telling each other your story and you're finding that space of recognition. And I think it takes time to know what your story is. Some of us do, like you said, if we know our Myers Briggs and our Enneagram type, have a sense for a piece of our story. But I think that it's just a little bit vague if we don't take time to look
Mm.
deeper. So I'm guessing your course takes that deeper dive and allows them to sit with whatever their typology is or whatever their constant repeating negative storyline is, that you are probably helping their relationships too. It sounds like that's been really powerful for your story in your marriage.
Yeah. Um, and like somebody in the most recent cohort wrote about conflict she was having with with someone else in her family, not a spouse. So I guess I can say like a sibling-in-law, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and and it was especially brave of her because she was actually writing about something that was not quite finished yet.
Mm,
Like it was heading towards some resolution, but it wasn't totally, we talk about it like a wound versus a scar, that
mhm,
like it was still kind of healing up a little bit. And she wasn't quite sure how to get to that next level,
mhm.
um, where she could fully forgive the person and fully work through, and ended up being, fully owning her part of it. And so it was like, that was especially just powerful to witness that it was like the story was still unfolding as she was writing it.
Yeah.
And that process was,
Wow.
it's like, from the narrative perspective, it's like, well, you don't really have like an ending yet. Like you got to keep going. Like, what is your the denouement, or I'm forgetting the words that I use right now, but
Mhm.
it's like the transformation hasn't really finished here. So like
Yeah.
what, like you need to say more here. And like that narrative prompting then helped her to keep digging into it until she found that next layer.
Mm, that's powerful. You make a great point that some of our stories have not had closure yet. And so, as we write out our stories, when you and your students are finding these gaps or these places where there's still work to be done, do you think it becomes therapeutic at that time for them to start checking in with themselves about where they're at in the journey and what they need to do next? I think that's what you're saying here.
Yeah. Um, I guess just, each case is so
Mhm.
unique, but there's always, so we talk about it like we mentioned there's a transformation that happens. I'm doing a circle because you mentioned the hero's journey, and there's often I'm like doing a circle with my fingers for
Yeah,
those
yeah,
listening,
yeah.
um, that you start at what is called the status quo, which is like
Mm,
life as you know it. And
yeah.
then something sort of sets that off kilter, and you go on this adventure,
Mhm,
which may be entirely internal, or there could be an external journey involved
mhm,
sometimes. And then by the end, you go through this transformation, and you kind of come back to the life as we know it place, but life as we know it is now a little bit different because you are now a little bit different. And so it's that, like, what is the new status quo? Like, your life circumstances may or may not have changed at all,
mhm,
but your experience of those circumstances is going to be different because you are different. And so thinking about, well, how am I different? And what does that mean? And how could this change the way I live and operate in the world? And there's some sense of like, well, how do I want it? What do I want my ending to be?
mm. Yeah, that's empowering that there may be some choices that you're not aware of, and that as you write it out, you get clarity that there are a few different pivot points you could make.
Well, and that ending point is actually one of the most powerful tools
Mm,
because, like when let's say back to that, like my friends abandoned me story, it's like if I end the story at the moment when they're like making fun of me in the other room at the sleepover and I'm like crying in a corner by myself, that is a terrible, sad, tragic, hopeless story.
yeah, it is.
But that doesn't need to be the end. Like I get to decide, that's part of the authorship of like, well, no, actually, that was just the middle of the story.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I can choose a different point from my past to be the end of the story. And of course, none of our stories are end ended, but
Yeah.
it's like a series, right? There's gonna be another episode, but where's the
Mhm,
end of this episode? And I could end it when, I'm hanging out with my two best friends at age 40 that,
mhm, mhm.
like know me better than anyone has ever known me, and
Yeah,
just
well,
like laughing uproariously, and like are kind of epitomizing everything that I always wanted and didn't think I could ever have, but like
mm,
I now have it.
amazing. Wow. Thank you. That's very powerful as an answer to people who are feeling very lost. And I'm just happy for you. It sounds very personal too that that has become a reality for you.
Yeah, well, I consider that one of my greatest blessings, and it's not to say there aren't any hiccups or that my life is perfect.
Yeah.
And it's taken a long time,
Mhm.
but I also want to share, like, it's possible that I could have a positive ending to that story, even if I still don't really have friends.
Mm.
Um, I mean, I do think having friends is like one of the most important, valuable
Mhm.
pieces of life.
Mhm.
So hopefully everyone can get to a
Mhm.
place where they're able to find and develop and
Mhm.
maintain rich friendships. But, there were other times, like I could have ended that story when I started, the previous part was a middle school story. And then that was like the summer after eighth grade. And I started high school with zero friends.
Mm.
And, my mom told me, like, and I was like, well, what do I do at lunch? And I was like trying to follow people around and they were like trying to avoid me. And it was like
Mm.
awful. And so she was like, just bring a book and sit by yourself and read your book. I
Mhm.
think that might have been when she introduced me to the phrase fake it till you make it, which I kind of hate as an Enneagram 4, but has
Yeah.
some value.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was like, well, I actually really love this book and I love reading. And, maybe I'm learning it's okay to be alone. I'm still okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a different ending than I'm abandoned and being with myself on my own is the worst.
Right. And there's something wrong with me.
Mhm. Yes. Oh my gosh, that's a different ending and it's powerful. And I'm feeling that as I think every listener, as you're thinking about your story and something right now that's tough for you, and just hearing Mara say that there's hope for that, and often writing it out or thinking it out with clarity and encouragement, like your mom in her own way of doing that, um, that's powerful. And I like how you invite people to do that with you. And how has, since you brought up Enneagram, how has Enneagram been a helpful tool for you in doing your work?
Well, I think one of the most powerful parts of the Enneagram, for me, that I've noticed is the way that it helps us recognize our own lens,
Mm.
which I think ties right into the story. Like basically, it helps us. It tells you like this is the kind of story that you're believing. That like
Mhm.
your type spins this type of story. So
Mhm.
like for a 4, it's like sudden unexplained rejection or abandonment that then is
Mhm.
internalized as your fault, and then you believe that no one really understands you. And it's like, oh well, there it is.
Yeah.
And so whatever your type is, then you can look for. I think it can be helpful to look at the childhood wounds explanation,
Mm.
and see, okay, like what is that childhood wound that, at least as far as like the deep, deep stories, I think
Mm.
it's really helpful that way. Then you can see, and then you'll see iterations of them in perhaps less, profound ways, but like, one is like criticized and punished for mistakes. And so
Mhm.
like, maybe a story that like, no one sees how hard I'm trying,
Mm.
or like my husband, 7,
Mhm.
like, in childhood at some point feels alone in his pain and overwhelmed, and
Mhm.
then learns that he's the only one that can help him avoid pain.
Mm.
And also then like people dump their feelings on me, but don't give me the support or comfort I need. And so then
Mhm.
he's like looking for that and expecting it to happen.
Mm. Mhm.
Um, so each type has one of these core stories that then I think like becomes that ocean
Mm.
that they're swimming in without realizing it.
Mhm.
And of course, it's not easy to go back and think about those things, and especially if anyone's had capital T trauma in their childhoods or in their lives, then of course we need an extra layer of care and
Mm.
caution. Not to do too much too fast, and to like listen
Mhm.
to your body about like what is feeling safe. But
Yeah.
the way to recover from trauma is to rewrite, to retell, to craft a narrative. Like the research on trauma shows that part of why it's so psychologically like destructive is that our brain is not able to create a coherent narrative out of what happened,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
certainly not able to create an empowering narrative.
Mm.
So at the right time and with the right support, if we can kind of relive some of those experiences in a supportive context
Mm.
where we are safe, then we can actually like move past. some of those things. And I always say I'm not a therapist. This is
Mm,
not professional counseling, and encourage everyone to seek that. But
mhm,
also writing, particularly when there are other people who can bear witness and hold space with you, can
mhm,
be just an incredibly powerful healing experience.
mm, mhm. Right, right. People have not had traditional therapists over millennia, and yet people have found safe people and places to do their work. And you remind me of that Anne Voskamp quote of shame dies when stories are told in safe places. And
Mm,
I think that you're a safe place. I really do. So
well,
I'm
I
just
hope
so
so.
happy, yes, that you're offering this. I think that if you could tell others about your program, it would be helpful just so we can even bring some clarity as we end today. We know you're sharing how writing helps with this inner work, but tell us about just what we can expect if people want to work with you on Unearthing Beauty.
Sure. Um, if you're someone who's intrigued by this type of work, or is feeling, a little tug
Mhm,
internally toward it, maybe you enjoy writing, or you've been wanting to write about your life, but maybe have struggled to get started,
mhm,
this might be a great fit. Um, I say it's about half and half, people who maybe have some professional writing aspirations and people who do not at all. They're like,
mhm,
I want to write about my life so that my kids can really know me. Or
mhm,
I just want to write about, I feel like God is telling me to write about this story. Or I just want to write about it for myself to understand it better. So you don't have to have any writing experience. There is a bit of a faith component, but um, like I come from, I've struggled with terms of what to call it, but like I started sort of calling it an edgy Christian background, where I grew up hating religion and especially Christianity, and didn't convert until I was actually in Spain, which I mentioned before, 2004. So almost 20 years ago next month. But point being that, like, it's a very open, welcoming, like, in group. But there typically are people who talk about, like, God in a Christian framework. So if that's not you or that bothers you, that's just something good to know.
mhm,
Um, and okay, so it's a 12-week program.
mhm,
It's a small, intimate group. You get feedback on your writing every week from me. Like, I look at your Google document and give you some suggestions or encouragement.
mhm,
And then we have a live call every week as well to talk about video teachings that are housed online to watch at your own speed. And then we sort of workshop and discuss um, each week. And then that's where people might start sharing more. And let's see. So at the end, you end up with a deeper sense of who God is calling you to be, plus a polished personal narrative that you can publish or share with friends and family, or just keep as a reminder of, the beauty that can come out of things that maybe didn't seem beautiful, or the transformation that you're capable of, or and you know the the beautiful writing that you're capable of.
mhm. Oh, that's so helpful. And it's so nice that you do get that finished piece. And of course, we know we're all, like you said, still in process, but to be able to say, this is my story, this is where I've come from, this is where I've landed, these are the meaningful pieces, this is where the beauty is.
Mhm.
That's really neat. And I like how you take your time across these weeks with it. Um, I also enjoy your Substack, that when I do read what you're sharing there, I love that too. So maybe you could also tell people about how to find you in other online spaces.
Sure. Okay, so my website is maraeller.com, and you can do /unearthing beauty to find out more about that program.
Right.
Um, and well, I also mentioned really quick, I'm working on a new workshop that's going to
Mm.
be live in mid-October,
Ooh.
called Wake Up Wanting to Write, Uncover Your Blocks, Get Stuck, and Fall in Love with Writing Again. And this is coming out of my own struggle, that, of course, I don't want to be vulnerable about, but I know the path to freedom is by sharing these things. Um, but that I still struggle when it comes to my creative writing. Like, I have a novel that I want to write, and I
Mm.
feel like this is part of what I was created to do, and yet I really, really struggle to sit down and do it. So I've
Mm.
been thinking a lot about that strange, like, cognitive dissonance of, like, why can't I do this thing that I want to do, but
Mm.
also seem to not want to do? And so that's something I learned best by teaching. And so I've been getting a lot of coaching. And so anyway,
Mm.
if you are more of a writer and ever have that kind of struggle, this could be a great option too. So that's going to be at maraeller.com/want to write.
Mm.
And then appreciate your kind words about Substack. So
Yeah.
um, you can, search for Mara Eller, and my publication there is called One True Sentence.
Mm.
And I write about the stuff we've been talking about today, some personal narratives, and also more about writing craft. So something I did recently that I thought was pretty fun was I shared a personal narrative of my own, and then I wrote about the process of revising it. So I'll be sharing writing tips and insights that can help you grow as a writer and a person. And I guess, a little bit of a unconventional faith perspective sometimes.
Yes, yes. But
But
it's
yeah, just
unique.
yeah, that sort of it's always going to be going deep, basically.
Mm.
So if you want something really shallow and surfacey and fun, well, I think maybe I can be fun sometimes, but I might not be the best combination for those things.
Yeah, you're just saying I dig really deep. And I think we know that when we have somebody on this podcast that's in the Enneagram 4-wing 5 space, there's nothing deeper and there's nothing more profound. So if we're doing our deep dive work, this is where we want to be. This is where we need to be. And thank you for being with us because it can be, I can speak for myself and probably several others here, sometimes terrifying when we start unearthing and then we're waiting to find that beauty. So thank you for sitting with us in that dark night of the soul
Yeah,
while we wait too.
it is there. Just sometimes takes more digging or just more
Mhm.
waiting. Yeah, but it always comes.
Yes, thank you for being a place where people can process their feelings, their shame, and do so with eloquence because you're a great writing teacher. So thank you, Mara. It's been such a gift having you today and learning from your wisdom.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Oh my goodness,
Appreciate it.
absolutely. Yes, thank you.